in our job situation also.
That Darshanas traditionally are 6 in number or 9. When the number is 6, it is usual to count 3 pairs, 6 systems in 3 sets, like Samkhya and Yoga, Nyaya and Vaisheshika, Mimamsa and Vedanta. The pairs are because the theoretical standpoints and the outlook of the 2 systems are almost the same, like in Samkhya and Yoga, for example. Their philosophical background is the same. The acceptance of the 5 basic elements and the concatenation of them into 24 tattvas, etc., etc. Sankhyans as well as the yoga people accept the same philosophical position, but branch off. One is more theoretical, the other is more practical. Likewise, Nyaya and Vaisheshika, they are both interested in the methodological analysis, and they have a contribution to make in the direction of system building. How to build up a system of thought. Nyaya and Vaisheshika are both groups of thought are particularly interested in this. And Mimamsa and Vedanta, they are more or less concerned with the problem of the ultimate good, the ultimate value, namely the moksha. So the 6 systems, all of these 6, they are directly or indirectly related to the Vedic tradition. So it is usual to call them the Vaidika Darshanas, the Vedic Darshanas. And when the enumeration of Darshanas is 9, to these 6 are added the Lokayata, or the mundane metaphysics, as it's called, the materialism, and the twin ascetic systems, Sramana systems, like Bauddha and Jaina. So these constitute the major scope, orbit of the darshanas. Now I don't know if I will have time enough to do justice to the 9 systems, but to give you a very general idea and the relationship between the Vaidika and the Avaidika darshanas. The darshana, before we deal with any of these darshanas, I propose to deal in some elaboration with Lokayata and the Bauddha darshanas. So that's all that I can possibly do in these 3 hours. I would have to make a very sketchy statement of the Samkhya and the Yoga. But Nyaya and Vaisheshika, I would necessarily have to leave them out of count because it's an elaborate methodological system, and its epistemology, and its pedagogy, and its ontological system is very interesting, and there are books regarding that. Well, the darshanas as systems of thought, the shastra that I mentioned yesterday, they began with what is known as the sutra. Sutra is a suggestive mnemonic statement. Sujanatu sutram. The sutra is an aphoristic statement, a half sentence, sometimes an isolated word, which is a sort of a capsule of an entire area of thought. All that is condensed and formulated in a cryptic, laconic statement, which consists of not more than 5 or 6 words. and it is rarely a complete sentence. The sutra style is peculiarly Indian. You don't find this kind of mnemonic statement, a capsule of the entire thought, in any other culture. But we have had it since at least 300 years prior to the birth of Christ. We have the Vaisheshika Darshanas, as old as that, and the Samkhya Darshanas are supposed to be even earlier, because even the Buddhist texts mention the Samkhya Darshanas, Samkhya Sutras. And the Buddha himself is supposed to have studied under two teachers, Arada Kalama and Uddaka Ramaputta. And Arada Kalama was a Sankhyan teacher. And he taught the Samkhya philosophy to the Buddha. And the Buddha recalls that they were in the form of sutras, small half sentences or isolated words. But unfortunately, the Samkhya Sutras are not available to us. They have gone for all time. The earliest sutras that we have are the Vaisheshika Sutras. So Vaisheshika is a system which is more akin to the physics of the modern days. It deals with the material objects, the peculiar characteristics of each object, Vishesha, of each Padartha. Padartha is an object of knowledge, an object of the sense organ. It's a sensible object, and the Vaisheshika system, it tries to crystallize the physical features of each of these objects. So the Vaisheshika Darshanas, they are the earliest, and they make a mention of the 5 basic elements: the earth element, the water element, the fire element, the air element, and the ether element, the Panchabhutas, Prithvi, Ap, Tejo, Vayu, Akasha. So the Vaisheshika Sutra tries to build up its thought system on the basis of these 5 basic elements, and the entire universe being treated as composed of these elements, which could ultimately be broken down to the atomic particles, the Anu or Kana. Kana is the ultimate indivisible part, aspect of the matter. So the author of this system is supposed to be Kanada or Kanabhuk, one who enjoyed eating the atoms, Kanabhuk or Kanada. So this is only a metaphorical way of describing the emphasis of the system. It is the analysis of each of these objects into their lowest denominations. Well, after these Vaisheshika Sutras, we have the Nyaya Sutras. Nyaya is derived from the root ni. Ni is to carry, to lead, to guide. Nyaya is what guides a man, what leads a man to correct knowledge. So our knowledge of the world is either correct or incorrect. If it is correct, it's called Prama. It is incorrect, it could be the absence of knowledge altogether, Ajnana, or it is a wrong knowledge, it is Anyatha Ajnana, or it is doubts, uncertainties or Samkhya. So this Ajnana, Anyatha Jnana and Samkhya together constitute the Aprama, the wrong knowledge. The correct knowledge is called Prama, and this Nyaya system prescribes the various procedures which one has to adopt to reach this correct knowledge. And they specify the means of obtaining such knowledge, and they call it the pramanas, or the means of knowing, like observation, pratyaksha, inference, anumana, analogical reasoning, which is upamana, or the testimony, verbal testimony, or the reliance on the word of authority, or Shabda. Well, the Nyaya system is peculiarly interested in these methodological essays. How do we know at all? How do we make use of our sense organs? What is meant by a sensory knowledge? And how does the mind make up the rest of the image on the basis of the sensory data? And how does inference work? How is inference correct at all? Under what circumstances can inference be misleading or be erroneous? And what are all the various mental processes that accompany the pratyaksha and the anumana? And when we believe a word of authority, what makes us believe in the word of authority? Where does the veracity of the shabda or verbal authority consist in? So the Nyaya system inquires into these details. And their main interest is to certify that a particular body of knowledge is correct because it has been correctly got at, correctly reached. So Nyaya is what guides us to think aright, what leads us to correct knowledge. So the Nyaya Sutras were the next in chronological order that we got. And the third most important sutras are the Samkhya Sutras. Well, I will have to deal a little bit about the Samkhya later on. But the Samkhya system, which is the earliest system that we know of, the Samkhya Sutras, they are no longer extant. I suppose you have got a rough idea of what a sutra is. Mnemonic statement which becomes totally unintelligible without explanations. It's a sort of a device to remember things after you have heard a lecture for 1 hour, 2 hours. You try to encompass the entire lecture, provided the lecture has been integrated in unitary in aspect, by a simple statement, by a half statement. That's only mnemonic, that's for your, but they have been, they are handed down through generations, and every student, as soon as he sees it, he will recall the traditional annotation and explanation of each sutra. Well, these sutras are the starting points of these darshanas. The Nyaya Darshana evolved from the Nyaya Sutras, and the Samkhya Darshana evolved from the Samkhya Sutras. And the Vedanta, for example, to give you an idea of how the sutra style, these Vedanta Sutras. Vedanta is a term given to the end portion of the Upanishads. As I said yesterday, there are 4 Vedas: Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda and Atharva Veda. Rigveda is the earliest of the Vedas, and Rigveda is the Veda proper. A part of the Rigveda has been taken over and adapted to ritualistic purposes, and this is called the Yajurveda. And a part of the Rigveda has been adapted to singing during sacrifices, musical recitations, and this is the Samaveda. And the parts of the Rigveda have been taken to explain the diseases, the trees, the fauna, the flora, etc. This is the Atharva Veda. And each Veda consists of 4 parts, 4 sequences: the Sanghita, the Brahmana, the Aranyaka, and the Upanishad. Upanishad is the last and the final part of the Vedic corpus. So therefore the Upanishad is called Vedanta, the end portion of the Veda. So Upanishads constituting the end portion of the Vedic literature, every Upanishad is called the Vedanta. So Shankara, for example, uses this word Vedanta only in the sense of the Upanishads. Sarve Vedanta Arabhyante. When he says that, it means that all the Upanishads begin with this intent in mind. So this Vedanta, the entire philosophy of the Upanishads, the entire approach of the Upanishads, was crystallized in aphorisms, 442 or 555 aphorisms, and these are called the Vedanta Sutras. This is to crystallize the philosophy of the Upanishads. A person known as Badarayana, he sat and devised this mnemonic framework, and the sutra is supposed to have a methodology. It should enunciate the purpose, the statement of the purpose. This is called Uddesha. So what you are talking about, what you are going to deal with, must be stated in the very first sutra. So the Vedanta Sutra starts with Athato Brahma Jignasa. Here we will inquire into the nature of Brahman. Ataha Brahma Jignasa. Now then we will so he fixes the framework. We will not deal with anything else excepting this. This is the Uddesha. Uddesha, the purpose. This is first sutra. Then the second sutra is called the Lakshana Sutra. You have used the word Brahma, but the word Brahma means several things. There is the Brahma who is four-faced, four-headed Brahma, Chaturmukha Brahma, and there is a Brahma who is supposed to be a creator, the Srishtikarta Brahma, and the sacrifice is called Brahma, and the Veda itself is called Brahma, and a particular ritual during which a twice born one changes his status, it's called the Brahma. Now, which of the Brahma are going to deal with here? So this Lakshana is the definition. After you state your purpose, you must define precisely the terms which you are using. So you said Athato Brahma Jignasa. Who is this Brahma? The next sutra says that Janmadyasya Yataha. This Brahma that we are dealing with is one who has been responsible for the entire being of the universe. Janmadyasya Yataha. We are dealing with the ultimate reality which we call Brahma. This is Brahman in the neuter, not Brahma in the masculine. This Athato Brahma Jignasa. Second sutra is therefore called the defining sutra, Lakshana Sutra. And then to inquire into the nature of Brahman, what are you relying on? Do you rely on perception? Do you rely on inference? Do you rely on your reason? What are you depending upon? What is your modus operandi? What's your means? What's the means that you are employing? Then the third sutra says, Shastrayonitvat. We depend on the tradition that has been handed down to us. The tradition which depends on not merely observation, the personal experience and the intuitional insight which the sages have had. We rely on that. Now, if you rely on this, every individual will have his own experiential quantum, his own observational framework. How are you going to rely on all of them alike? Now the fourth sutra says, we employ a method of synthesis. Tattu samanvayat. We will synthesize what is relevant and what could be integrated into one unit, and then we go about. So after this Lakshana comes the third sequence called the Pariksha, or the examination. So all the sutra literature follows this Uddesha, Lakshana, Pariksha triad. Statement of the purpose, definition of the terms, and then an examination, an inquiry, the relationship between them and whether the experience could be integrated with the observation and with the intuition and so on. Now this Nyaya Sutra specialized in giving the model sutra. So Nyaya Sutra is even now the model of our wisdom. How we build up a system of knowledge at all, this is the approach of the Nyaya. And Samkhya system makes full use of this, and it develops a complete, integrated, self-reliant and consistent system of thought. Well, the onus of these 6 systems, they rely either directly or indirectly on the Vedic tradition, the tradition that has been handed down from the Upanishads. They are very closely aligned to the Upanishadic thought, and therefore they are called Vaidika Darshanas. The Vedic Darshanas are, in the olden days, they were called the Astika Darshanas. Per contra, on the other hand, we have the Bauddha and Jaina systems, which are designated as Sramana Parampara, the ascetic systems. Well, I propose to deal with Buddhism at some length today. So the Sramana systems, the Sramana Parampara, they are Buddhism and Jainism. Buddhism, I said I would deal with a little later. The remaining darshana is what is called the Lokayata darshana. Lokayata has several variant expressions like Charvaka, Barhaspatya. This Lokayata, as early as the 4th century AD, a writer called Bhaguri, he mentions there are the Barhaspatya Sutras, sutras written by Brihaspati regarding the Lokayata system. This Brihaspati is called Brihaspati Laukya Sutras. So there must have been the Charvaka Sutras or the Lokayata Sutras, but they are not available to us in their original form. The Lokayata system, which is interesting, which has the misfortune of being represented erroneously by the orthodox systems, well, because this was considered to be the Nastika system, and all the other systems were up against this system, including the Bauddha and the Jaina. They were attacking the Nastikas continuously. So this Lokayata system, I thought, was an interesting attempt to project a common sense view of philosophy. The word Lokayata, it merely means Lokeshu Ayatam, prevalent among the people. Loka is Padartha Samuha or Jana. Loka means people, the public. And it also means Lokyate iti. Loka is that which you can see. And it might surprise you to know that the word Loka or Aloka in Sanskrit is derived from the root luk, which is also the basis for the Anglo-Saxon English look. Look is to look. So lokyate iti lokaha. What you look at is the world. And what you look at is what becomes the object for your sense organs. Padartha. Or there can be no idea, there can be no word which does not have a corresponding form, and there can be no object of which you can have an idea unless you have a word label to it. Well, try to imagine an object without using a word for it. It is impossible for us to have a wordless image. Whatever we think is only in terms of words. So the verbiation, the phenomenon of verbiation is indispensable in thinking. What they call the imageless thought or the wordless image is an impossibility. So these lokayatas, they base themselves on this premise that the objects of the world are objects of our sense organs. The objects are there and we can name them. We can use words for them. Padartha. Artha is the object. Pada is the word. The object which can be verbally expressed and sensible to the sense organs. So the objects of the sense and a whole collection of them is called the loka. Loka is the padartha samuha, the range of our sensory objects, the range of our sensations, and the range of our transactions with which we deal with these objects. And loka also means the people. Lokeshu ayatam. Ayata has two meanings. One, prevalent, spread. So lokeshu ayatam. This philosophy is prevalent among the people, among the common but critical people. Lokayata. And lokeshu ayatam. This is dependent entirely on the world of sensible objects, the world of objects which you can sense. And therefore, we are not interested in anything which the sense organs can't provide data of. So the framework is precisely about the world of material objects. This is the lokaya. But the darshanas frequently mention about this particular school of thought, the Barhaspatya or the Lokayata or the Charvaka school of thought, and they frequently name them Swabhavavadins, those who explain things on the basis of their own natures, innate natures. For example, in Sarvadarsana Sangraha we get a statement attributed to the Lokayatas. Agnirushnaha jalam sheetam sheetasparshas tathanilaha kenedam chitritam tasmat swabhavat tadvyavasthitihi. The fire is hot, water is cold, and the breeze is cold to touch. Who made all these things? Kenedam chitritam. We can't say, you don't know. Tasmat swabhavat tadvyavasthitihi. It is sensible to say, it is common sense to say, it's their nature. It's the nature of the fire to be hot. It's the nature of water to be cold. Swabhavat tadvyavasthitihi. So these people believed that things are what they are because of their essential nature. You need not go beyond this to explain the things of your transaction. So this Swabhavavada, a reflection of this is also to be found in the Bhagavad Gita. Swabhavastu pravartate. There is this Swabhava being given importance to. Well, this Swabhavavada, which the Lokayata system is described as, is to oppose and controvert three other viewpoints. One is what is called the Yadrichavada. Yadricha is chance, accident. Things happen purely by chance. Whatever happens, happens only by accident. There is no predetermined, preordained law. Cause and effect relationship does not obtain. Everything happens by chance. This is Yadrichavada. It might surprise you to know there was one group of people who held this view.
Brihaspati was one of the founders of the...
Yes, Brihaspati.
But he also known to be a Devaguru. Could he have founded the
No, I will. The burden of my talk now is to show that it is not Nastika actually, it has been misrepresented by the orthodox This is to controvert, number one, Yadrichavada. There is no law, there is no reason, there is no rationale for things that happen. Everything happens by chance. Yadrichavada. And then the second one is what is known as the Adhyatmavada. Adhyatmavada is that there is an unseen force, God, who supervises, superintends and controls and regulates. This Adhyatmavada is belief in God as the sole arbiter. So whatever happens here is directly because God wills it so. Thy will be done. So God's will is being done, whatever happens, good or bad. The third is what is called the Adrishtavada. Adrishta is there are unseen forces beyond everything that you see. You see the effect, but the cause you don't see. You see the cause now, the effect is not seen now. So there is always an adrishta, unseen force at the back of everything that you see. So there is an unwritten, there is an inscrutable law which governs everything in this universe. What you see is only part of the picture. The major part of the picture is beyond your purview. See the Adrishtavada. And this Adrishtavada, it led to concepts like punya, papa, sin, merits that you acquire, the soul, etc., etc. The Charvakas or the Lokayatas, they discounted all these three systems, the Yadrichavada, the Adhyatmavada and the Adrishtavada, and they said things could be explained here and now. It is a common sense view. Well, we always tend to believe that Lokayata was a system vouchsafed and believed in by a group of people, just as there were the Nyayikas, just as there were the Vedantins. There were also the Lokayatas as one distinct group comparable to our Naxalites or communists. At some point of time there were these materialistic thinking people, but it does not seem to be the case at all. Well, I'll give you an example why it's not so. Because I mention this because our Indologists, most of them Western Indologists, they have done a lot of good to us. They have edited our texts, they have printed them, they have translated them, they have written books on our philosophy, but they have ignored Indian tradition altogether in their own imperialistic way, and that arrogance of the white skin. They have ignored to take into consideration the Indian tradition altogether. They have cited and they have presented these systems in a totally un-Indian viewpoint. This Lokayata is one such. Buddhism is another. They have projected these systems which is totally strange to us. So this Lokayata is not a system of thinking. It is not a group. It does not consist of a group of people who at any time thought of these things. The very word Lokayata, Lokeshu Ayata, means whatever was prevalent among the common people. Everyday life of the people engenders a kind of philosophy. A philosophy of drink, eat and be merry. So this philosophy has been raised to a level of metaphysics. Well, to show this, the Mimamsakas have a strong affiliation to the Vedas, and they are ritualists, pure and simple. They follow all the ritualistic details prescribed in the Veda, and the Mimamsakas, whom even Shankara rejects and rebuts, Kumarila in the 5th century wrote a book called Slokavartika, which is a remarkable work on Mimamsa philosophy, the philosophy of Mimamsa. Well, while laying down the reason for writing this book, he has a curious statement to make. Mimamsakas are Vedic people, very orthodox people, super orthodox people, conservatives in the extreme. They form the core of the Vedic tradition. But a Mimamsaka, Kumarila, is one of the greatest of our thinkers, even superior to Shankara. Kumarila was a giant of a thinker. He wrote his Slokavartika and Tantravartika. There he makes a statement. Prayaha Mimamsa loke lokayati krita tam astika pathe netum yatnah kriyate maya. I have undertaken to write this book because the Mimamsakas have become lokayatas. And in order to bring them back to sense, astika patha, yatnah kriyate maya, I have undertaken this work. How can the Vedic people become lokayatas? Lokayata is one who rejects all authority. But the commentator Parthsarthi Mishra says, Mimamsakaha lokayataha karmakandaparaha loka siddha sukha lubdhaha ityarthaha. The lokayata merely means karmakanda paraha, those who are interested only in rituals for the sake of loka siddha sukha lubdhaha, out of their greed to get the best of the world here, to get the material benefit. Loka siddha sukha lubdhaha. So the term lokayata does not indicate any one group of people. Whoever was interested, whether he was a Nyayika or a Mimamsaka or a Vedantin, whoever was interested in the pleasures here, in the benefits here, was a Lokayata. So Lokayata is not any one particular group of philosophy, this is general philosophy, and the Swabhavavada is their characteristic front. And they were Bhuta Chintakaha. They held that there were only 4 fundamental elements responsible for the entire universe, including man. The earth element, the water element, the air element, and the fire element. Prithvi, Ap, Teja, and Vayu. Akasha, they did not include among the group of bhutas because it was not visible. So whatever was not visible, whatever was not ocular was rejected as was precluded from the category of the bhutas. And they said these are the 4 bhutas, 4 ultimate elements responsible for the entire, and these can somehow energize an individual. This energy could come in how Kindvebhyaha Madashaktivat. They gave an example of a person eating the betel leaves, the churnam, and the areca nuts. He chews them. The lips become red, the tongue becomes red. Where was his redness? Redness was not in the betel leaves, it was not in the churnam, it was not in the areca nut, but by a concatenation of all these, samohatvat, there is a red color. So therefore, when these 4 elements work in a particular way, soul comes into being. Soul or the spirit or the energy comes into being as a result of the concatenation of these four elements. And what you call soul or spirit is nothing other than the body. Dehatma vadinaha. This body itself is the soul. And when the soul, when the body is dead, it does not come back again. Bhasmi bhutasya dehasya punaragamanam kutaha. There is no rebirth. There is no effect of karma. The life that you have is the only life that you can ever have. Therefore, it is misrepresented in an orthodox text. These charvakas were charvaks. Charu is sweet, sweet-tongued fellows. They talked something which was very pleasant to the ear. Therefore, they were called charvakas. They said, "Bhasmi bhutasya dehasya punaragamanam kutaha." When your body is going to be burnt after some years, how does it come again? Therefore, rinam kritva ghradam pibet. Even borrowing, you must drink ghee, whatever the doctors might say. Rinam kritva ghradam pibet. That's to say, enjoy your life, make merry, because you can't come back again. Make merry. But this was not the Charvaka view at all. I'll explain it later. And the emancipation that one gets after the body falls, this is called Videha Mukti. Not while you are alive, but after you are dead and gone, when the karmas have all been exhausted, when your wisdom has dawned, you should wait till you die. And then there is no more rebirth for you. When there is no more rebirth, that's moksha. Moksha is the absence of rebirth. But Shankara says, more valid than this moksha, which you can't experience, which is merely hypothetical, which is merely conjectural, which has a veracity only by the testimony of the Shastras. More important than this is to get liberated even when you are living in this very body. This he called Jivan Mukti. You must obtain the benefits of emancipation while you are still in your body, when your mind is active. You enjoy your emancipation only through your mind when the body. So this is an echo of the Charvaka, the Lokayata view, that the only thing a man should aspire for is peace and tranquility in this life. There is no more that man need do. The other important aspect of the Lokayata philosophy is Manam Pratyakshameva. Observation is the only authority, only means of knowing things. There were two groups of Lokayatas. There were two viewpoints of the Lokayatas. One who called themselves the Dhurta Lokayatas, the rascals of materialists. They believed that only to see is to believe. They did not believe in inference even. So you can't infer anything. Only if you see, you believe. Drishta Vadins. They confined their attention, their philosophy of life, only to the things of immediate consequence. There were Sushikshita Charvakas, or cultured materialists, who conceded that we don't know all things by perception, direct perception. Although we accept the primacy of perception, there is something else, what we infer from, which also guides us. We look at the clouds and take an umbrella with us. We don't see the rain, but you are convinced of the possibility of the rain by looking at the cloud. So you are inferring. You are not ordering your life on perception. You also order your life on the basis of inferences like this. But the inferences, like the Occam's razor, should not be multiplied beyond necessity. You can't infer, for example, that you have a soul, that there is a God sitting on Mount Olympus, having a rod in his hand, threatening all of us. These are inferences which are not valid. The inferences should not stretch beyond the range of worldly objects. If you look at the yonder hill, and if there is smoke on it, you infer that there is fire. This is all right. But if you look at the man and say he has a soul, this is an uncalled for inference. So the Sushikshita Charvakas, they believed that the body was the soul. But what part of the body was the soul? Some people said the physical body itself. Some people said the sense organs were the soul. Some people said the prana, the vital current, was the soul. Some people said the manas was the soul. Whatever that is, soul is not independent of this psychophysical framework that we have. Sukha is of absolute importance to man. Arthakamau, Purusharthau. Man has only kama, the desire fulfillment, as his goal. But he should have the wisdom to see that the pleasures can't be got for nothing. They have to be got in exchange for what you have and what you give. This is artha. Arthakamau purusharthu. Therefore, an individual should earn and enjoy. A very wise philosophy, I should say. Not it's arthakamahu purusharthu. Because even if we subscribe to whatever philosophy of highest platitudes, we actually live on these counts. Arthakamahu purusharthu. So the only two purusharthas are artha and kama. Artha is money, kama is pleasure. But they said, arogyam nahiyeta. Take care of your health, because an unhealthy body will not procure any benefits to you. You can't earn, you can't enjoy your life. Arthakama purusharthau. But for this arthakama, artha and kama, arogya is of fundamental importance. Therefore, yama niyamau sadhayeta. You must be disciplined. You should be disciplined by some authors, and they have been collected. So these sutras give a lot of worldly wisdom in tiny capsules. This arogyam na parihiyeta is one of them. And he says, apathya bhojanam, ati bhojanam, mrityu preetikaram. One of the sutras says, eating what is not indicated, apathya bhojanam, and ati bhojanam, eating over much, these are mrityu preetikaram. They are very dear to death. And one of the sutras says, na mamsa bhakshane doshaha, na madhye, na cha maithune, pravrittiresha bhutanam. There is no sin in eating meat. Na mamsa bhakshane doshaha, na madhye, in drinking liquor, or in maithuna, or enjoying. Pravrittiresha bhutanam. This is the natural tendency of every man. How could there be a sin? Pravrittiresha bhutanam. Samyamaha atirichyate. But if you are disciplined, that's of great mahaphala. And this can have a great benefit. So this is the normal tendency of man to enjoy. But while you are enjoying, you must have that yama and niyama, the control and the restraint. Therefore, na ati pibet, don't drink much, na ati makshanam, etc. It gives a series of rules, including na ati vadecha, don't speak too much, which perhaps applies to me. Na ati vadecha. Well, we'll stop there. In deference to Brahaspati's. they tried hard to show that Pali, the language which is current only in Ceylon, to be the early form of Buddhism. So in Buddhism they speak of two phases. One is what is called the Hinayana or the Theravada, and the other the Mahayana. Hinayana is a small vehicle. Theravada is the path of the elders. And the Buddha is supposed to have spoken in Pali. That was supposed to have been the language spoken in Bengal and Bihar of those days, Magadha of those days. And Sanskrit is the language of the Mahayana Buddhists. So the Hinayana Buddhism prevails in Ceylon, Burma, Korea, part of Korea, Sumatra, Bali, Indonesia, etc., etc. And the Mahayana Buddhism, Sanskrit-based Buddhism, it prevails in Tibet, Nepal, China, Japan, Mongolia. So this is the Mahayana. So they tried to see two distinct schools of Buddhism, one prevailing in the south and the other prevailing in the, and they put forth a theory of their own that Pali was the language which the Buddha spoke, and the early scriptures of Buddhism are in Pali. And I happened to study Pali for 4 years under a Ceylonese monk here, only to discover later that Pali was not one of the Indian languages at all at any time. The Magadhi, which was the prevalent dialect in Magadha, the old Bihar and parts of Bengal, was the language of the Jains. The Ardha Magadhi and the Magadhi was the language of the Jains, which is very much an Indian language. Pali was never spoken of in India at any time, and it is purely a textual language. So Pali means a row. It was a written language. It was written on the palm leaves. So the Buddha's words were written in a language known as Pali, which Mahapandita Rahul Sankrantyayana, whose name you must have heard, a great savant, he pointed out this is a confabulation of the Ceylonese people. This is not an Indian language at all. But we read in our textbooks, we have an entire generation has grown with the belief that Buddha originally spoke in Pali, as if Pali was a language spoken in our country. So this is how, and that Shankaracharya drove out Buddhism. It's another figment of imagination which is being spread. Actually, Shankaracharya lived in the latter part of the 7th century. And Buddhism prevailed in the country till the 9th century and the 10th century, and there was the University of Nalanda, there was the University of Vikramashila, Odantapuri, Takshashila, where Buddhism was taught. Buddhist monks were there. And Buddhist monks from India, from Orissa, Bengal, they have gone to Tibet as late as the 11th century. So even after several centuries after Shankara, Buddhism continued to be a force in the country. And in South India, till the 14th century, Buddhist temples were prevalent, viharas were prevalent. In Kanjivaram, in Pattadakallu, in several places in Karnataka, Buddhist viharas were in. So this is a total lie, Shankaracharya, and that he was an anti-Buddhist, anti-Veda. Even a great votary of the Vedantic creed like Shankara, he has never criticized Buddha anywhere in his works, in his bhashyas. He has not criticized Buddha at all. He has taken up only two schools of Buddhism, the Yogacara and the Madhyamika, for criticizing some of their views. And Shankaracharya has criticized the Mimamsakas and the Pancharatrins and the Pashupatas, and not so. This whole tirade against Buddhism that it was anti-Vedic was a figment of the European imagination. It does not hold. And this Anatmavada, how they went to the extent, there is a book called Dhammapada. Dhammapada is supposed to be like our Bhagavad Gita, a collection of pithy sayings of the Buddha, suiting several occasions. And this Dhammapada starts in the Pali Dhammapada, which has been given currency to, which has been printed, translated and annotated by Rhys Davids and others. This starts with the stanza, Mano Pubbangama Dhamma Mano Setha Manomaya. Mind is the forerunner of all things. And unfortunately for them, about 50 years ago, Sunit Kumar Chatterjee and Chintamani Kar, Chintaharan Chakrabarti, so they discovered in the Middle East a Sanskrit manuscript of Dhammapada dated 2nd century AD on the Bhurja leaves, the Dhammapada. And the first line there is Attapubbangama Dhamma Atmapurvangama Dharmaha. Everything follows the dictates of the Atman. So now what would you call this kind of scholarship? Well, that apart, that's what I meant when they say they have done a great disservice to us by projecting such erroneous views, and worse, by incorporating them in our textbooks, on which our children are fed, and they grow up with this conviction. It's a very
but those who know the truth, that's exactly what happened. What are they doing to correct?
well, the Buddha 2500 years ago, he was responsible for a system of thought and a school which evolved very much late in time. During Buddha's own days, his philosophy or his teaching was not regarded as an independent revolutionary thinking. During those days, what Buddha taught must have been like what Chinmaya mission teaches now, Ramakrishna mission teaches now. It was one of the missionary activities during those times. Didn't make much of a mark. Even during the days of Ashoka, the king, 200 years later, even Ashoka does not mention Buddhism as a separate creed or a separate school of thought. And he does not mention Buddhists as a separate sect, as the Risley's report made out. The Buddhists and Jains were apart from the Hindus. So in the general population, Ashoka names Sramana Brahmani, the various gifts he gives. And he mentions Sramanas and Brahmanas. The Brahmanas were the householders, and Sramanas were the ascetics, the monks, the renunciants. So the gifts that he makes are for these two groups of people. There is no mention of the Buddha or the Jaina or the Ajivika. It was a general category of ascetics and householders, householder teachers and ascetic teachers. And in the first century before Christ, BC, when the teachings of the Buddha were written down, were documented for the first time in a Sangiti. Till then, the teachings of the Buddha came in oral tradition only. And it is said that the year of Buddha's death, in the rainy season, all his direct disciples met in Rajagriha and they decided to collect the very words of the Buddha. So the leader of that assembly or conference, he asked those who had assembled, will you please get up, those who had been with the Buddha and recall the teachings of the Buddha and the occasion. So one person would get up and said, when the Buddha was in Varanasi, in Jetavana, Varanasi and Jetavane, a Brahmin, Sundarika Bharadwaja, came and asked the Buddha this question, and the Buddha answered like this. And the president of the conference would ask, was there anyone else present during that session? 2 or 3 people would get up and say, yes, I was there at the present. This is what Buddha said. Then that was accepted as the word of the Buddha, and the entire group was asked to recite it 3 times. So that was how the Buddha's teachings were collected. And every rainy season, all the disciples of the Buddha would gather in one particular place and recite these things periodically for 6 days, 7 days. This is called the Sangiti, or collective chanting of the Buddha's words. This is how the Buddha's teachings were preserved. But in the 1st century BC, for the first time, they were all transcribed in the Bhojapatras. And it was then this Buddha Vachana, or the words of the Buddha, were taken across the country to the Middle East and then to the borders of Tibet. This is how the teaching spread. So it was then that the entire words of the Buddha were divided into 3 baskets. These were called the 3 Pitakas. Pitaka or Petika is a basket. 3 is 3. 3 Pitaka is the 3 baskets. The first one related to the daily life of a monk, of a householder, and the rules of life that were relevant and valid to everyone. This was called the Dharma Pitaka. And the other was specific to the monastic community. How should a monk and nun live? What should be the regimen? Etc. etc. This was called the Vinaya Pitaka. And then the exegesis or the metaphysics and the philosophy, that portion of it, the ethics, the ontology, the epistemology, all that was collected in the Abhidhamma Pitaka, the 3rd basket. So this forms the scriptural basis for Buddhism. Well, in Buddha's own life, even there, what I said earlier has a bearing. You have read Edwin Arnold's book, The Light of Asia, isn't it? It's a very popular poem, well-known poem, famous poem, Edwin Arnold's Light of Asia, which is the life of the Buddha, where Buddha is made to get into the spirit of dispassion on a particular day, and leaves home, leaving his wife and the little son Rahula. Isn't it? We all know that story. He went away from home, leaving his wife Yashodhara and a newborn one Rahula, and he walks into wilderness. Agarasma Nagari. Where did Edwin Arnold get hold of this idea? That Buddha left his home, left his wife and child, and went in search of the Bodhi or enlightenment. The Buddhist texts themselves say Buddha, when he was going to Ajatashatru, Ajatashatru beckons to him and asks, you look like a prince. What made you take up to this begging life? There is lazar in your face. Why have you taken to this? Then Gautama, or the Buddha, he recounts his own sort of account. He tells his own story. And there he says, in the Magadhi language, Daharova Santa Matapitunnam Assumukhanam Rudantanam Kesamassum Moharetva Kasayani Vathani Achadetva Agarasma Anagariyam Pabbaji. When I was a young boy, When my father and mother were weeping, were with tear-filled faces, Mata Pitundam, Assumukhanam Rudantanam, they were crying bitterly. I renounced Agarasma Anagariyam Babbaji. I went from home into homelessness. And he says, Dahareva Santaha. In my very tender years. So even as a boy, he did it. There is no mention of this Yashodhara and Rahula going away. It's all romantically very appealing. But there is no basis for it in the Buddhist texts themselves. So Edwin Arnott has created this myth. And we all are fed on that myth. Well, he renounced. The important thing is that he left home. That he left home and studied under two teachers, Arada Kalama and Uddaka Ramaputta. And there is an account of what he studied. The Buddha himself says that with Arada Kalama he studied the Samkhya system. And with Rudraka Ramaputra he studied the Yoga system. But the two systems did not completely satisfy him. So he left them and went into the Uruvilva forest and there performed a penance for 7 long years, severe austerities. And then when he had almost given up, that his entire search was misguided, under the Bodhi tree, assuming the Satipatthana posture or the Dhyana posture, he obtained the enlightenment, which made Gautama the Buddha. He became the Buddha. The Buddha means one who was awake, one who is awake from the slumber or sleep. So after he became the Buddha, there was doubt in his mind. Should I tell others what I have seen now, or would it be a waste of time? Then the Buddhist texts make the evil incarnate, Mara, come and tell him, you have got something out of your strenuous effort for 7 years. And if you tell others, who will believe you? Who will follow you? And you will be wasting your time like making knots in the air. Akase gantikarana kalovya, like making knots in the air. You will waste your time. Better enjoy the freedom that you have got and kick your bucket and pass off quietly. But there was another side of him which he said, no, not all people are blind. Some people might have dust laden in their eyes and they might be wanting to see. If I don't partake of what I have seen with them, I'll be failing in my duty. That made him come out from Uruvilva to Banaras, to Varanasi, and preach the first sermon, which is called the Dharma Chakra Pravartana Sutra. The sutra that set into motion the wheel of Dharma, Dharma Chakra Pravartana Sutra. So here he gives a vivid picture of the contents of his enlightenment, what it was that made him free from the suffering that he had for 7 long years. He was in a severe duress of anxiety and stress, of discomfort for 7 long years. And suddenly he found relieved, relaxed, and he could smile for the first time in 7 years. Hasovati, I could smile after 7 years because I was completely free. Muttaha, mukta is completely free. I was free from that anxiety. Then he went in search of the 4 ascetics who were practicing penances with him in Uruvilva. They had gone to Rajagraha, to Varanasi, Sarnath, the present Sarnath, and there he taught this first sermon. In this first sermon he gives an account of the 4 noble truths, Arya Satya. which he discovered for the first time. The first truth, dukkham iti. There is stress, there is misery, there is unhappiness, which calls for attention. Arya Satya means gamanarha. Satya is what should merit your attention, what should merit your concern is that there is suffering. Suffering or stress or strain is a positive reality in life. You can't ignore it. Dukkham Arya Satyam. And the second truth is that this misery, this unhappiness, this stress, this anxiety or dukkha is not uncaused. Dukkha samudayam Arya Satyam. This is caused, this is a basis, this is a background, this is an antecedent. If there is this, that will come out. So the Buddha evolved a method of analysis later on, idam atti tadatti. This being here, that will be there. This not being here, that will not be there. The cause-effect veridical relationship. Well, he says that there is a reason, there is a cause why we are unhappy. This unhappiness does not come out of nothing. It is not a figment of our imagination. It is caused by our own reasons. And the third truth, dukkha nirodham Arya Satyam. That this dukkha could be wiped out, could be erased, could be undone, could be annulled, is a truth. It's a truth that it could go. That there is suffering is a truth, that this suffering also will go, that's also a truth. And the fourth truth will be dukkha nirodha gamini patipada Arya Satyam. That there is a method by means of which this misery could be annulled and avoided. This is the fourth truth. So these are the four great truths that the Buddha is said to have discovered for himself. That there is misery, there is the cause of the misery, there is the state of absence of the misery, and there is a method by means of which this could be reached. And then the Buddha said, there are some things which are futile if we think about them. Achintyas. Achintya is achintaniya. Not fit for our thought, not fit that we should bother about them. There are things which we can't mend or which we can't cure or which we can't grapple with. And the ultimate origin, for example, when did the world come into existence? When did the misery start? These are questions which are futile. One should not trouble one's mind with this historical perspective of the dukkha. What was the first time when this dukkha started, that began to torment human beings? The Buddha said these are achintyas or achintaniyas. These are not worthwhile thinking about. What is more important is to realize that there is dukkha and that you are heir to it. And I gave the example of a man who has been struck by an arrow, poisoned arrow. He will not have time to think about the arrow and think about the person who shot him down or the contents of the poison. Or his immediate concern is to take that arrow out. So also when a man is besieged by the sorrow, misery and angst or anxiety, his immediate need is to obviate this. And this being an experiential factor, it is profitable to know how it all arose. Just as in medicine there is this fourfold dimension, namely roga, the perception of the disease, the observation of the disease, and roga nidana, diagnosis of the disease, how it has been caused, and arogya, the absence of the disease, and arogya sadhana, or the vaidya, or the particular medicine that you take to recover the health that you have lost. So Buddha is considered to be a bhishak, a vaidya, a doctor, a medicine man, who gave this clinical picture of this misery. Incidentally, I have written a monograph on the anatomy of suffering, which deals with this aspect. Well, the Buddha said our immediate concern should be the cause of the dukkha. Why are we in this state of misery? It is profitable for us to introspect and arrive at the basic truths. And he said, ultimately it all results from the desire, the hankering or the desire, which is an attempt to hang on to things of the world. So this he called the alambana. Our desire to be dependent is innate, inborn, and it is profitless again to think of the state of absence of suffering. It's enough if you know that it could come about. The state of nirvana, there is no point in thinking about it. The state of moksha, there is no point in thinking about it. But it is profitable again to think of how to reach that state. What are the actual procedures to reach that state? So the Buddha said, in this fourfold truth, two are achintyas, not worth bothering about: the misery and the absence of the misery, which he called the world, the mundane world, and the nirvana. But the cause of the suffering and the means to reach nirvana, they must be our concern. They must be within our jurisdiction. So the entire Buddhist philosophy pertains itself to these two: the analysis of suffering and the reaching of the nirvana. Therefore, one is the theoretical aspect, the other is the practical aspect. Well, without going into the details of Buddhism, the contribution of the Buddhist thinking to the entire Indian thought: number one, Buddha was the first person to give an idea of the basic ignorance. We are unhappy because we are ignorant. We don't know. This is avidya. So avidya, which figures very importantly in Indian thought, was a contribution of Buddhist philosophy. This idea of avidya. There is a basic ignorance, and to know is to be released, not to know is to be bound. This was Buddha's teaching. So the primacy of knowledge. To know is to be released, not to know is to be bound. And the second great contribution of the Buddha is regarding the two standpoints, samvriti and the paramartha. Samvriti is the transactional world, the world in which we live, move and have our being. This world can't be rejected. This standpoint can't be rejected. So even if I aspire for nirvana and moksha, I should drink my coffee, I should eat my food. This is samvriti. So no man can reject the world in which he finds himself. This is samvriti, satya. It's truth, it is real. The world is real. But this reality is not ultimate. This reality is not absolute. This reality is not without, is not enduring. There is a reality beyond this. A reality which is more real than this. This is called paramartha. Paramartha are ultimate, the beyond. Parama is beyond. The reality beyond. There is a reality here. There is a reality beyond. The world is real. as long as we are all engaged in our normal activities. But at a higher standpoint, at a higher level, all these is ephemeral. In our own lives, we engage ourselves in activities which several years later we consider childish. Oftentimes we would be ashamed that we were doing these things at some point of our time. So we have risen from one level of truth to another level of truth. So Buddha was the first person who gave this country an idea of this dichotomy of standpoints, the empirical standpoint and the metaphysical or the higher standpoint. And the Buddha also said there is continuously a movement from the lower level of reality to the higher level of reality. Every man wants to reach up and up. Urdhva sota. Urdhva is upward. So there is an upward mobility in man from one level to the other level of reality. And the third great contribution of Buddhism is about the doctrine of karma. Every action that we do is bound to have a reaction, is bound to leave a trace behind. Chakkamba vahato padam. Even the wheel that rolls on the road leaves a track. Everything that we do, we think, we speak, leaves a trace behind. So nothing that is done is lost forever. Whatever we do, think or speak, the three, vacha, kammana, manasa, this will leave a trace behind. And it will be a potential force to determine your next state of existence, next action. So this action and reaction are continuous and unending, unintermittent force of karma. So this karma, bound up with the idea of punarjanma, is typically a Buddhist contribution. The Vedas don't have this. There is no mention of punarjanma in the Veda, the rebirth in the Veda. And in the entire gamut of the Upanishads, there is a solitary reference in Brihadaranyaka that an individual is like a caterpillar which moves from eating one leaf, it moves on to the other leaf to eat that. This is a solitary reference to punarjanma in the Upanishads. If in Hinduism today, if among us the karma theory and the punarjanma theory is so powerful, it is due to the Buddhist way of thinking. It was Buddha that emphasized the karma and the punarjanma. This was the third great contribution. And the fourth contribution of Buddhism is the importance that he attached to yoga. Yoga as a method of disciplining oneself, one's mind and body, to be eligible to reach the higher level. So, from Buddha's days onwards, yoga has become an inseparable part of all our philosophical systems and religious systems. And lastly, the Buddha is known to have advocated the middle path, the madhyama pratipada, the middle path. So the Buddha says, even in the very first sermon, there are two ways. One of them, both of them are anattha samhito, the disastrous. Both the ways are disastrous. What are these two ways? One, kamesu sukhallika yogo. One is a life given to pleasures, life given to maximization of pleasures. This is kama ati yoga. And the other is absolute renunciation, not partaking of any pleasures whatsoever, and emaciating the body, weakening the mind, and so on and so forth. Both these, Buddha said, are wrong. The golden mean is enjoying within limits and restraining oneself also within limits. The golden mean or the madhyama pratipada. And for this the Buddha said, one must order his life. One must pattern his life. So the Buddha, for the first time, made out a case for programming life. You can't live as you were born. Sometime you must sit back, think and plan your life. And for planning this life, there is a eightfold path that he gave. Right thinking, right speech and right livelihood. So you must pursue a profession which is not evil laden. You must speak so that you are not hurt, you don't hurt another being. Samma sati, samma vacha, samma kammanto, samma. So this eightfold path which he gave is a guidance for the common man. And Buddha and Jina, Mahavira, Vardhamana were contemporaries. So Buddha, Gautama was a senior contemporary. So Mahavira gets the message from his disciples that the Buddha is dead in Kushinara. And Mahavira is said to have said he was a great man. So they were contemporaries. And they lived in the same area, Magadha. And a monk during those days, as it is now, was not allowed to stay at one place. He had to continually be travelling, excepting in the rainy season, 3 months in the rainy season, Varshavasa. Other rest of the year, they must be continually wandering about. But curiously enough, the two never met. It's one of the ironies of history that the two great saints of our country, living in the same province, living contemporaneously and continually wandering about, could never meet. So Jainism, which Mahavira is supposed to have crystallized, of course, like Buddhism, the Buddhists don't believe that Buddha was the founder of Buddhism. And every Buddhist will pray early in the morning, Eja Buddha Titacha, Eja Buddha Anagata, Pachuppanna Chaye Buddha, Aham Vandami Sabbada. I bow to all the Buddhas that have been till now. And I bow to all the Buddhas that will appear henceforth. And I bow to all the Buddhas that are now there. So this Gautama Buddha was only one who crystallized this. So Buddhism itself, likewise, the Jains think of 24 Tirthankaras. And the Rishabha was the first man who gave us the culture, the Adi Tirthankara. And Vardhamana Mahavira was the 24th Tirthankara. And he crystallized the Buddhism that we have today. And Buddhism and Jainism is largely akin, excepting that Jains prefer asceticism to the middle path that the Buddha taught. Barring this solitary instance, Buddhism and Jainism are by and large the same philosophy. Shall we stop there? It must and follow it with yoga, because they are the twin systems, Samkhya and yoga. Well, the Samkhya system is by far the most systematic and methodical of the systems that we have. And the Samkhya system has been a very ancient one. It's even pre-Buddhist. The Buddha is supposed to have been taught the Samkhya system by Aradhaka Lama. And we have elaborate accounts of the Samkhya even in the literary works. For example, we get accounts of Samkhya in Mahabharata, at least in 6 places. In Bhagavata, and in several Puranas, and in epic poems like Ashwaghosha's Buddha Charita, you get accounts of Samkhya. And the Bhagavad Gita is almost a Sankhyan work. And the very first chapter of Bhagavad Gita is called the Samkhya Yoga. Samkhya Yogo Nama. And the Samkhya is basic to Ayurveda, the Indian medical system. In Charaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita, you get fairly detailed accounts of the Samkhya system, because their entire theory of diagnosis, prognosis and therapy are based entirely on the Sankhyan ideology of the gunas and the guna vaishamya and the guna samya, the equilibration and so on. And Samkhya again is basic to the tantras, the various tantric disciplines which in the north and the south we are acquainted with. They are all basically Sankhyan in orientation. And a curious discipline regarding worship, the worship at home and worship in the temples, called the Agama. Agama is based on Samkhya again. So Samkhya has had a very pervasive influence, and Samkhya has given our most popular ideas. We speak of Purushartha, we speak of the gunas, we speak of the Sattva, Rajas and Tamas, and we speak of the Avyakta, the Prakriti, the Vikriti. They are all given by the Samkhya. So the impact that the Sankhyan system has had on Indian culture is tremendous. It has entered into the very fabric of our social and religious and philosophical thinking. Well, the expression Samkhya is usually derived in two ways. One, as a number, as an enumeration. Sankhyayate iti Sankhya. Sankhya is number. Samkhya is that which deals with numbers, or the enumeration of categories, the analysis and enumeration of categories. So the entire universe, the entire individual constitution could be basically reduced to a few categories, the tattvas or the padarthas. So the Sankhyan analysis into 24, 25 or 26 categories, or the tattvas, is the characteristic feature of the system. So therefore, Samkhya is sometimes derived from the word Sankhya or number. That which deals with Sankhya is Samkhya. But the more valid derivation of the word is from the root khya, to know. Sankhya is to know well. Samyak khyayati iti, or knowledge, correct knowledge, comprehensive knowledge. So the Samkhya is a way of knowing things correctly, knowing things veridically, as they say. And Samkhya became distinguished by its emphasis on jnana or knowledge, as against the karma of the Vedic people and the bhakti of the Bhagavata cult. So Samkhya emphasized on knowledge principally. And knowledge not merely for intellectual edification, knowledge even for liberation of the individuals, the jnana for kaivalya. Well, the earliest documents about the Samkhya have come down to us only in references. The sutras of Kapila, Kapila is supposed to have been the first spokesman of this school, and he passed on this wisdom to Asuri, and Asuri is supposed to have passed it on to Panchashekha, and Panchashekha is supposed to have written the sutras or the basic aphorisms on which